I was 16 when I realized I didn't belong to my own family. Not in the dramatic way teenagers say it's slamming doors and screaming, "You don't get me, no." I mean, I truly felt like a stranger living in a house built for someone else. My name is Emily Carter, and I grew up in a modest home just outside Asheville, North Carolina. My mother, Patricia Carter, was all Southern charm and sharp eyes, always dressed up, always ready to entertain. My father, James Carter, was a machinist, quiet, careful with hands rough from decades of labor. And then there was my sister, Lindsay, 2 years younger, a tornado in pink sneakers and glitter lip gloss. Lindsay got everything: the attention, the praise, the second servings. I was the quiet one. I read novels, fixed buttons, and made my school lunches. Lindsay laughed loudly and left a trail of admirers. At PTA meetings, Mom would beam and introduce her to teachers like she was the star of the family. Me, I was Emily, the bookish one, keeps to herself. One Saturday morning when I was 10, I set the table early for a brunch my mother was hosting. I'd even made place cards carefully folded with gold ink. When I brought them in, Mom didn't even look up. "Emily, not now, sweetheart," she said, not unkindly, but not kindly either. "You'll confuse things." That stuck with me. I wasn't helpful. I was confused. But Dad, he was different. He was the steady beat behind all the noise. He'd come home with oil stains on his sleeves and ask how school was. Not in the way people ask because they have to, but like he wanted to know. When I got a perfect score in 8th grade algebra, he taped the test to the fridge like it was a diploma. I saw Mom roll her eyes behind his back, but he kept it up there for weeks. He didn't pick favorites. He showed up the same way every day. Even as we got older, the dynamic didn't change. Lindsay bounced from job to job, living in spurts of excitement and disappointment, but Mom always made excuses for her. "That place was toxic," she'd say, or, "She's too creative for that kind of work." I, on the other hand, got my first job at 17 bagging groceries and never looked back. I paid my way through community college, got a job in accounting, and learned how to patch drywall because no one else would help when the apartment ceiling leaked. I called home most Sundays. I drove in to visit, but it was always like arriving at someone else's family dinner. They looked surprised when I showed up. Lindsay, though, her photos lined the fireplace mantel prom internships, her 3-month trip to California, which Mom paid for. Mine were somewhere in a box, probably. Still, Dad made space for me. He'd leave the porch light on when I was driving in from the city. He'd have coffee brewed the way I liked it. Half-calf splash of oat milk, even when Mom insisted no one else drank that stuff. "This house feels quieter when you're here," he once said, flipping through an old copy of Popular Mechanics. In a good way, that was enough to keep me coming back. Then came the fall, literal and figurative. Dad retired without ceremony. No cake, no party. Just walked in one evening with a box and said, "That's it. 42 years. The first few weeks were good." He built a bird feeder, started growing tomatoes. Recovery didn't go well. Dad never owned up. Suddenly, the man who used to fix everything was sitting on the couch of dust, frozen in place. At first, I visited him, readjusted. I helped where I could. But slowly, things around the house started to slip. Mom didn't like the stillness. "He just sits," she whispered once to Lindsay, not knowing I was in the hallway. "All day. Doesn't even try to move." Lindsay agreed, flipping through a beauty magazine. "It's heavy in here. Can you blame him?" I asked, stepping into the room. They looked up startled. Mom forced a laugh. "Oh, Emily, don't take it the wrong way. We're just not used to this." Phase. They didn't see him anymore. Not like I did. The man who once patched the gutters in the rain, who carried Lindsay on his shoulders at the state fair, who never missed a Sunday dinner, that man was still there, just quieter, slower. But he still noticed when I came into the room, still asked about work, still smiled when I brought over his favorite carrot muffins. Mom, meanwhile, started planning trips. "We just need a break," she said, sliding a spa brochure across the counter. "He'll be fine for a few days. You've always been so capable." They never asked. They just assumed I'd take care of everything. And for a while I did. I coordinated with Teresa Johnson, a retired nurse we hired part-time. I managed prescriptions, filled out forms, and handled bills. But underneath the daily routine, something started to unravel, something I didn't see coming until it was already gone. The unraveling began with whispers, soft, avoidant, and loaded with things no one wanted to say aloud. Teresa noticed it first. One Wednesday afternoon, she arrived for her usual shift. I'd just finished folding a load of Dad's laundry when I heard her call out Emily. I met her in the hallway. "Is your mom home?" she asked. I shook my head. "She and Lindsay went out to dinner." "Why?" She frowned, glancing at her watch. "They were supposed to be here. I was told someone would assist with the lift today." I blinked. "Assist." She sighed. "He needs help transferring now, Emily. I can't do it alone anymore. This isn't safe." That night I stayed late. Did it myself. Brushed Dad's teeth. Changed his bedding. The whole time he apologized. "I didn't want this for you," he murmured. I didn't know how to respond, so I just sat beside him until he drifted off to sleep. The next day I called Mom. "You can't keep disappearing," I said calmly. "You and Lindsay need to rotate days." "I can't do this alone." Mom sighed heavily, like I just told her she had to cancel her birthday. "Emily, I didn't sign up to be a nurse. I'm not good with all that." Lindsay chimed in later that night via text. "You're so much better at this stuff than I'd ever be. You've got binders and alarms. It's like your thing, my thing." Their distance became a routine. Teresa and I handled more and more. When I asked Mom to at least take over the mail and paperwork, she waved a hand. "It's just bills and junk. I barely look." That wasn't true. One day, I noticed Dad's bank statements had stopped coming. I asked Mom, she shrugged. We switched to paperless, less clutter. That nagged at me. Something felt off. I'd helped Dad set up that online account years ago. I tried logging in again. Access denied. The password hadn't changed. My access had. So I called the bank. "Sorry, Miss Carter," the manager said politely. "You're no longer listed on the account." My chest went tight. "Since when?" "There was a revision to the power of attorney documentation about 2 months ago." I didn't hear the rest of what he said. Just noise. Clicking. My pulse is in my ears. That night, I confronted Mom. Lindsay was there too, curled up on the couch in yoga pants and sipping wine. "You took power of attorney without telling me," I asked, holding up my phone. Mom didn't flinch. "It was necessary. For medical decisions, legal things. You could have said something." She shrugged. "We didn't want to complicate things," Lindsay added. "It's not like we're doing anything shady. Don't be dramatic." But I wasn't being dramatic. I was being erased. They'd taken over completely on paper, in practice and planning, and I hadn't seen it coming. The weeks passed hollow and slow. Dad started using the wheelchair full-time. The bird feeder rusted. The tomatoes withered. Still I stayed. Adjusted. Adapted. Until one day, in early September, the balance tipped again. Dad's voice had gone quieter over time, less like speech, more like air. But that day, he barely moved. A hospital scan revealed the truth. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Months, the doctor said. Maybe less. I sat alone in the hallway, staring at the beige linoleum floor. The hum of vending machines filled the silence. When I returned to the room, Dad looked at me once and squeezed my hand. He didn't ask. He just knew. That night, I went home, opened my laptop, and typed a 2-line email. Effective immediately, I am resigning. I appreciate the opportunity, Emily Carter. No announcement, no fanfare, just me walking away from a job I'd spent 7 years building. Lindsay's reaction: wow, that's a choice. Mom didn't say anything at all. But for me, it wasn't a choice, it was the only thing that felt right. I began making soups that Dad could swallow, set alarms for meds. I read to him at night from his old books, Mark Twain Vonnegut manuals on tool repair. He'd smile, faintly drifting off while I read about torque and pressure gauges. One evening, while organizing the den drawers, I found a thick manila envelope with Emily written on the front in his handwriting. Inside was a letter, a few pages of uneven lines, and a familiar steady hand. Emily, if you're reading this, I probably don't have the breath left to say everything out loud. You've given more than anyone had the right to ask. I've watched you love without reward and care without being asked. I don't have much to leave, but I've done what I could. Don't wait for permission. Start your life. There was more. Behind the letter, a signed rental agreement for a small, sun-filled 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of Boone, North Carolina. We'd once passed it on a drive to a clinic. He had pointed and said, "Nice place." Close to the park. He'd already made the deposit. Also in the envelope were wedding receipts, deposits on a venue nestled in the Blue Ridge foothills, a photographer's retainer, even a florist contract. It wasn't for Mom. It wasn't for Lindsay. It was for me. And for Mark Benson, a hospice case coordinator who'd started filling in for Teresa a few nights a week. He was quiet kind. We'd talk on the porch over paper cups of gas station coffee. I hadn't even told Dad about him. But apparently he'd noticed. You deserve someone who stays. Dad had told me once, just before his voice slipped away for good. He never told Mom. Never told Lindsay. He didn't need to. He trusted me to find it when it mattered. Dad passed early on a Sunday morning. I'd just finished changing the sheets, humming quietly as I folded the corner of the blanket. The light from the window caught his face soft still, and something about the room felt different. Slower. Like the air had settled. When I turned to look at him, I knew. He didn't open his eyes again. There was no gasp, no last words, just a quiet exhale and then stillness. I sat beside him and held his hand. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just stayed. Let the stillness have its place. When it was time, I called the hospice line. Then Teresa. I made the arrangements. Mom and Lindsay didn't answer right away. On my third try, Mom finally picked up. "We're out shopping," she said. "You'll have to handle things." And so I did. I called the funeral home, filed the death certificate, booked the chapel, and picked out the flowers. I chose lilies, he always liked those. Soft, understated. Later, Lindsay texted, "Let me know what time the service is. I'll see if I can make it." That was all she said. The morning of the funeral, I arrived early. Straightened chairs, set up the guest book. The first people who entered were old coworkers from the factory, neighbors who remembered his toolbox always being open for them. Mom showed up 20 minutes late, dressed in a tailored black suit and designer sunglasses. Lindsay walked in behind her chewing gum, still wearing sunglasses indoors. They didn't help, didn't ask. But when the pastor asked if anyone wanted to say a few words, Mom walked to the podium like it was her moment. She spoke about Dad's quiet strength, his love, his steady hands. I stared at the floor. Let the words pass over me like wind. None of it felt true. Not from her. After the service, I drove back to the house. His house. It still smelled like his soap and old coffee grounds. But they were already there. Mom and Lindsay sat in the living room with wine glasses, shoes off like they'd just gotten home from a spa day. "We need to talk," Mom said. I didn't sit. I stayed near the doorway, still in my funeral dress. "Can it wait?" "It can't," Lindsay said, holding up a document. "This is just a waiver. It means you won't contest anything in the estate. Just a formality." I stared at her. Mom crossed her legs, leaned forward. We have power of attorney, Emily. It's all been handled. The house, the accounts. We've already spoken to the lawyer. They weren't asking. They were informing me. Lindsay smiled faintly. You don't live here anymore. You're getting married, right? You have your new place. It's only fair. I hadn't told them about the wedding, or the apartment, or Mark. Dad hadn't either. Gloria, please don't make this difficult, Mom said, using a voice that sounded polished for sympathy. We've all been through enough. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I picked up the pen from the coffee table and signed the waiver. They didn't even thank me. Mom smoothed her dress. You'll need to be out in 10 days. We've already contacted a realtor. Lindsay poured another glass of wine. That night I packed in silence. I didn't take much, just what was mine. A box of clothes. Dad's framed photo from the hallway. His notebooks were filled with sketches of homemade tools and scribbled gardening notes. The manila envelope. 3 days later, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. The number was familiar. The house, what used to be home. I answered. Mom's voice was sharp, tense. Where is it? Where's what? The money, she snapped. From your father's account. It's gone. Everything. Don't play games, Emily. I closed my eyes. You told me not to get involved. You said it was your responsibility. I respected that. Don't be cute, she barked. You were here. You know we didn't touch anything. You had power of attorney, I reminded her. There was a pause. We left the checkbook in the desk drawer, she said. But the money's gone. It's just missing. I never touched it. Lindsay's voice rang out in the background. Ask her again. She's lying. Mom came back on her voice lower. Emily, this is serious. We had plans. Lindsay quit her job. I booked the cruise. We counted on that money. You never checked the balance before Dad passed. Why would we pay to? He barely spent. He just sat there all day. I took a breath. Then you didn't know. Know what? There wasn't much left. Silence. Number. That's impossible. No, I said softly. It's not. Dad made other plans. He left deposits, a venue, an apartment, and wedding arrangements. It's all there. He made that choice. You're lying, Lindsay said, her voice rising. That's what he gave you. A wedding, some rent money. That's the inheritance. I didn't respond. Did he think that made us even? She asked, her voice cracking. Still, I said nothing. Mom got back on. Her voice wasn't sharp now. It was hollow. We have nothing left, Emily. The house needs repairs. We already paid for the cruise. Nothing is coming in. We need help. Just until we figure something out. I stared at the wall. You told me to leave, I said. Said I was no longer part of the family. That was before number. That was exactly who you are. I ended the call and blocked the number. I didn't hear from them again. Not directly, but word has a way of traveling. The cruise had been paid in full, non-refundable. They canceled it, but couldn't recoup the cost. Lindsay had already posted beach emojis and suitcase selfies promising a luxury escape. The house sat on the market for weeks. The roof needed fixing. The water heater broke. Buyers backed out. Eventually they sold it below market. Quietly. Fast. After the fees and closing costs, there wasn't much left. They moved to a small condo in the northern part of town. No yard, no porch light. Lindsay tried to go back to work temp jobs mostly. She stopped posting online. The boyfriend she'd been bragging about vanished. Mom tried to return to the consignment shop where she worked part-time. Her position had been filled, and at 67, no one was lining up to hire her. I never replied to their messages. Didn't need to. Their story was unfolding without me. I never looked back, not once. Moving into the new apartment felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. It wasn't fancy, just a second-floor corner unit with wide windows and creaky floors, but it was mine. Ours. Mark moved in 2 weeks after Dad passed. We didn't make a big deal out of it. No champagne, no new chapter speeches, just a quiet shared understanding that this was where life would start again together. The wedding was already set in motion before either of us officially proposed. Dad had done that part. The venue, the florist, the caterer, he had already signed contracts, submitted deposits, even scheduled a fall date that somehow made perfect sense. September in North Carolina was crisp gold lit, just warm enough to keep the evenings soft. It was his last gift, and I honored it exactly as he imagined. We didn't invite many people, just close friends Teresa and a few of Mark's coworkers from hospice care. No extended family. No Carter family at all. I didn't want questions. I didn't want their eyes or their apologies or their silence. On the day of the wedding, I stood beneath a canopy of oak trees holding Mark's hand while a soft breeze tugged gently at my dress. The venue, just like the brochure Dad had circled, was tucked into a wooded grove. The air smelled like pine and cinnamon. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, and I swore I could feel Dad somewhere nearby, just out of view. The ceremony was short, honest. We didn't write vows to impress, just promised to be gentle to listen to stay. After the kiss, I sat with Mark on the porch steps while everyone else enjoyed wine and music inside. We watched dusk settle. The quiet between us was the kind I had longed for my entire life, not lonely, not empty, just whole. Later that evening, after everyone left and the lights dimmed, we returned home. I unpacked my dress and hung it next to the framed letter Dad had written. We'd put it above the entryway where sunlight hit it every morning. The ink was starting to fade at the corners, but the words were strong. Take care of yourself first. You've done more than enough for me. That line lived in me. It kept me from slipping back into guilt, into the dangerous pull of old roles and expectations. Still, from time to time, I heard echoes of the past. A mutual acquaintance would mention seeing Mom and Lindsay at a grocery store, pushing a half-empty cart and avoiding eye contact. One day, I got a voicemail from an unknown number, Mom's voice, low and flat. Emily, we didn't know. About the cancer. About the money. We were angry. We didn't mean what we said. If you'd just call back. We need help. I deleted the message. They hadn't needed me when I was holding Dad's hand through the hardest nights. They hadn't needed me when I was changing his sheets, managing appointments, and keeping him company while they disappeared for spa trips and dinners. They needed me now, because the consequences had caught up. Because the plans they made, the ones built on money they didn't earn and love they didn't show, had all unraveled. And I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I felt nothing. Not because I'd grown bitter, but because I'd finally permitted myself to let go. Let them carry the weight of what they chose. One afternoon, I ran into Mrs. Donnelly, our old neighbor at a farmer's market downtown. She was buying tomatoes and looked at me like she was trying to place a dream. Emily Carter, she said slowly. I thought I recognized you. I heard you got married. Your father would have been proud. I smiled. He was. He planned it. She tilted her head confused. He helped arrange everything before he passed. Even the apartment. Her eyes softened. He always did love you something fierce. We all saw it. I nodded, said goodbye, and bought a small bunch of sunflowers. That night, I placed them in a mason jar on our kitchen table and told Mark about the encounter. He listened quiet as always, then reached for my hand. You okay? He asked. I am, I said. And I meant it. It wasn't about revenge. I hadn't signed that waiver to be noble or martyred. I signed it because I was done fighting for a place in a story that never wanted to write me in. I had my story now, one where love wasn't conditional, where peace wasn't something I had to earn. We never sent announcements, no dramatic updates on social media, no look what I overcame posts. We just lived. We bought a second-hand couch, started growing herbs in little pots on the balcony. On weekends, we'd take long drives through the Blue Ridge Parkway, stopping for coffee in small towns, with names like Banner Elk and Deep Gap. Nothing glamorous, but I'd never felt richer. Sometimes, in the stillest moments, I thought of Dad. Not with sadness, but with quiet gratitude. He saw me. When no one else did, he saw the daughter who didn't sparkle, didn't shout, didn't demand. And he loved her anyway. That was the inheritance. Not a house, not a bank account, but peace. A kind of love that didn't need to be spoken to be known. And after all those years of waiting to be chosen, I finally understood something I had always been. The final chapter didn't end with a slammed door or dramatic reckoning. It ended with silence, the good kind. I never responded to the second voicemail, or the letter that showed up in the mail 3 weeks later with Mom's cursive on a lavender envelope. It sat unopened on our counter for 2 days before I quietly slid it into the trash. I didn't need to read apologies written for their comfort. I didn't owe them closure. I owed myself peace. Mark understood. He never pushed. He never asked me to forgive or to reach out. He just kept showing up every morning with fresh coffee, every evening with quiet dinner conversations and shared glances that said, "We made it." The apartment filled slowly with little pieces of a life being rebuilt. A framed photo from the wedding, us under the oaks, smiling like we finally exhaled. Shelves with Dad's old gardening books. A thrifted record player Mark had found in Winston-Salem, always spinning soft jazz on Sunday mornings. The world kept turning, and I learned how to live inside it without flinching. A month after the wedding, we visited the cemetery. It was a gray We didn't bring flowers. Dad would have thought that was a waste. Instead, I brought a thermos of his favorite black coffee and cut his heavy cup beside the headstone. You were right. Mark stood behind me, his hand in his hand. No tears, just quiet gratitude. He stayed until the sun then walked back to the car with light hearts. Mom and I waited out behind. I heard from others that the condo had issues, plumbing mold, and rising rent. Lindsay floated from job to job, still chasing something shiny she couldn't quite hold. Mom tried to reinvent herself in book clubs and volunteer gigs, but people didn't stick. Sympathy has an expiration date when it's not rooted in truth. They'd made their choices, and I had made mine. Dad once told me, "You don't need to shout to be heard. The right people will notice you're quiet." At the time, I thought he was just trying to comfort a forgotten daughter. Now I understand. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Quiet means enduring. It means being the one who keeps showing up when no one else does. The one who knows how to carry pain without making it a spectacle. The one who loves deeply, even without being thanked. Sometimes that love goes unseen for years, but sometimes, just sometimes, someone sees it. Dad saw it. And Mark does too. Every time he notices when I go quiet after a long day. Every time he takes the trash out without being asked. Every time he remembers how I take my tea. That's the thing no one tells you. Peace doesn't arrive in fireworks or epiphanies. It comes in small, ordinary moments, quiet mornings, warm socks from the dryer, the sound of someone locking the door behind you because they want you safe. It comes in stillness. Not the kind that weighs you down, but the kind that holds you gently. We didn't become rich. We didn't inherit acres of land or bonds or houses with names carved into the mailboxes. But we inherited something better. The space to begin again. One day, I'll tell our future child about their grandfather. About how he loved quietly, steadily, with his whole self. I'll tell them he left no fortune, but he left something more enduring, a blueprint for how to care. And I'll tell them this: you don't have to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it. Sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you'll ever do. Sometimes not fighting back is what saves you. And sometimes the person who was forgotten is the one who builds something lasting, something true. In our entryway, Dad's letter still hangs. The ink fades a little more each season, but the words remain. Take care of yourself first. You've done more than enough for me. I read it every morning before leaving the house. Not because I need the reminder, but because I like remembering the sound of his voice in my head, steady, kind, sure. And on the days when the world feels loud, when the past tries to claw its way in, I touch the frame gently and say it back. I did enough. I was enough. And finally, I believe it. When people speak of inheritance, they often mean wealth houses, bonds, property. But for Emily Carter, what her father left behind was something far more valuable: dignity, trust, and love rooted in action. While her mother and sister schemed, manipulating legal power and financial control, Emily remained the quiet, steadfast caretaker, unseen but never unloving. Her father's final act wasn't revenge. It was a rescue. A handwritten letter. A paid deposit on an apartment. A wedding planned not with extravagance, but with intention. It was his final way of saying, I see you, I value you. And when everything crumbled for the others, cruise plans lost the house, sold for scraps, temp jobs, and vanished boyfriends, Emily didn't gloat. She walked away free from bitterness into a life that was gentle and real. This story is about justice, yes, but a quieter kind. The kind that doesn't shout or seek attention. It's about the resilience of the overlooked. About what it means to love even when it hurts, and to leave when staying costs too much of your soul. Peace, not property, became her inheritance. So to the ones who stayed behind, carried the weight, and never got thanked, this story is for you. You don't need to return to what broke you. You don't need permission to choose peace. You were never the problem, and you were always enough.